All right, everyone, this is relatively breaking news now. Israel has formally declared war on Hamas. This is something that hasn't officially happened in many decades, with the Yom Kippur War, actually. It's been a while. A lot of us weren't alive the last time there was an actual declaration of this kind from Israel. And this is why a lot of people, unfortunately, are underestimating the situation. We've seen nothing but strife and conflict within the whole Levant for quite some time. But normally it's more like it's a conflict without a formal declaration. So it's counterterrorism operations and so forth that are carried out. Hamas fires a couple dozen rockets. They attacked a border site. They found a Hamas tunnel and blew it up. The IDF has gone into a Palestinian-controlled area to nab some Hamas network leader, or they have bombed out a factory or sometimes civilian homes, leafleting and things like that. So you do have constant problems in the region. It's one of the world's most foremost flashpoints. But you don't get a formal declaration of war and the calling up of reservists. That's relegated to when there is something significant that has happened. Of course, Hamas fired thousands of rockets the other day. They did take a number of hostages. In fact, crossed over from Gaza and effectively, currently, I believe, still are in control of certain areas that are part of Israel proper. The IDF naturally responding and bombing the Gaza Strip, and now there are hundreds of people dead in both areas. I'd be surprised if you didn't get another uprising in the West Bank in coordination with this sort of an intifada sort of thing going on, and all hell could break loose. The other thing is you need to understand Israel's demographics are slowly changing, and the number of Islamists in the country is rising, and that also can potentially cause a problem, if not necessarily now, in the future. My thoughts are this. First, I'll give you my ideological thoughts. Anytime I talk about conflict between Israel and Palestine, I'll make this clear. I am not pro-Israel. I am not pro-Palestine. I'm pro-America because that's where I happen to be. I was born in New Hampshire. I was not born in Tel Aviv or in the Gaza Strip. I can see plenty of bullshit from both sides. There's plenty of propaganda from both sides, and there's mostly human misery on both sides. The actions of the Israeli and Palestinian authorities are typically lumped up with some sort of national will sort of thing, so that even when you get large-scale protests by people who simply want to be left alone to farm olives or whatever the fuck they happen to do, they're drowned out by a chorus of so-called patriotic sentiment, although I don't know that I'd call it patriotic. So, by making that clear, I'm guaranteed that in the comments section of this video, I will have people who sympathize with Israel saying, well, look at what Hamas just did. They're taking hostages and stuff. How can you not back them? I'm guaranteed that I'll get people who sympathize with Palestine saying, well, how can you possibly not sympathize with Hamas? Now, the methodology might be brutal, but look at what they're up against. The IDF terrorizes their people. Okay, rather sad, but I'm not Israeli or Palestinian, number one. Unlike some people that I've seen over the last 48 hours, my general anti-war sentiment doesn't go out the window because of situationalism. And no, I don't support a U.S. response on behalf of either side. I think the United States should sit it out. The IDF is a fairly beefy standing force, and with their reservists, it's even larger. I don't think Hamas is going to take over Jerusalem. I'm not going to side with Hamas and say, well, there's human rights abuses going on with the settlement system, which there is in the West Bank, and all this other bullshit, and say, oh, let me start supporting Hamas all of a sudden. No, I don't. I think that the region has been embroiled in conflict for several thousand years, almost nonstop. This is basically just a normal thing for the region, and the only times that it's ever had relative peace is when a larger power goes in and subjugates the whole area. The British with mandatory Palestine, things were a little bit less bloodsheady. The Ottomans, when they controlled the region, there was law and order there. Certainly under the Roman Empire, or under the stringency of Egypt, the region had relative peace as well, for short periods of time. The problem is that because of its location, resources, and all of the intertribal warfare that's always existed there, it's difficult for any foreign power to exert long-term force. My solution, therefore, is relatively simple. Let them duke it out, which they're going to do anyway, regardless of what any third party says. At this point, they've crossed that Rubicon. They've crossed that Jordan River. And sit back and sigh and say, well, that sucks. There's nothing else you can do. I mean, you could annex the area. The United States could go in and say, okay, Israel and Palestine are conjoined into whatever you call it, or kind of rename it Judea, and it's become a U.S. territory or something like that. That's about all you could do to have lasting peace in the area. Subjugation. There are some parts of the world in which, because of tribal customs and religious warfare, it's very difficult to establish a secular authority without overwhelming force. So unless you want to say, okay, we're no longer going to send aid over there, we're just going to take over management of the area and you'll have semi-autonomy like a Puerto Rico or something, I don't see any solution. Hamas is not going to get, Israel comes out and says, well, we're going to destroy Hamas completely. To do that, you'd have to kill an inordinate number of civilians. So that's bluster. That's Netanyahu's bluster. Hamas doesn't have the necessary firepower to take over Israel, and we're going to drive the Jews into the sea. It's not going to happen. It's bluster. Even if you teamed up with Hezbollah and like maybe the Syrian authorities got involved and maybe even Iran, all you'd have is a major regional war in which third parties would pour into the region, and the Christians would certainly be nervous. They'd be thinking, oh, the Battle of Megiddo has begun. You're going to cause some religious problems well outside of the Levant region if something like that happens. It's sad. Most of the people that get killed in any of these engagements, they're not even fighting. They're fucking civilians. Hamas launches its rockets. They don't have targeting systems. When Israel bombs out an entire village, there are going to be people there. Hamas typically tries to use human shields. You've got a very densely populated area on both sides of these somewhat malleable borders anyway. You can't conduct a strike without killing civilians. When Hamas goes in, they don't have a proper target and know who they're abducting. They just say, we're going to hold them for ransom. They're going to take some Hamas fighters hostage, and when things die down, we'll do a trade. Israel is engaged in the same basic thing. And yet I'm going to have people that are jumping down my throat saying that because I'm against directly involving ourselves in the conflict, which isn't even happening in our own backyard, that I'm either I either support Zionism or I support Hamas or something like that. It's fucking horseshit is what it is. People have this two-team mentality. They apply it to literally everything in the world, and they lack all political and social nuance. When prompted by propaganda, I would note, to do so, it happens even more. So yeah, you've got an official declaration of war, and so don't think of this as the conflicts you've seen traditionally over the last couple of decades. It's much more than that this time. There will be a lot more death, unfortunately, to come. For the Holy Land, it's certainly pockmarked with a lot of craters. There's more craters than tombs in the area at this point, and plenty of blood to go around. I'm surprised that the soil of the whole region isn't stained permanently red by rust by now. That's about all. Peace out.